Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today we're doing another garage episode, which I haven't done in a really long time. There's a huge storm coming, but the weather's good, and I feel like recording. So this will be a first nighttime garage shot. Still working on the lighting here. Hopefully it looks okay. So you know I love talking about aliens and anything out there that's sort of space, sort of aliens, sort of something to do with our reality. And so, but you know, I've also chewed up a lot of topics, and so I'm sitting there going, damn, like there's got to be like an infinite amount of subjects. But I just haven't found them all yet. And you know, what's interesting is, full disclosure, you know, every once in a while when I completely bottom out on, you know, the easier episodes that I can do by myself, it has to do with, you know, trying to think up everything on my own, but then I'll go out and try to search on conspiracies just to see what's out there. You know, my cigar lounge is pretty good about finding the latest and greatest. But, you know, when I go out there and look for them, what's fascinating to me is that, man, they're so on top of conspiracies now because it's a bad word, right? They're trying to make woke a bad word. And, you know, it's touche. You're fighting the deep state, so whatever. But the stuff I've been finding is so dark. And so, you know, I don't know. I found one that was all related to Epstein kind of stuff. And I was just like, man, I'm not interested in covering that kind of stuff. It's just all negative. There's a billion videos out for that kind of stuff. So we're going to stick with aliens. It's going to be fun. So one of the things that a lot of us hear about a lot, but we don't, again, pull it out, isolate it, and talk about it, is the anatomy of an alien. But, you know, often you will hear about Roswell and the autopsies. Of course, the most infamous autopsy has been completely faked, and the guy who did it's like, I'm really sorry. And then there's reptilian aliens, there's insectoid aliens. But here's what I've discovered in all my particular research. So I thought what we would do as a format for this particular show is kind of review the chronology of a lot of these theories and then go off on our own and imagineer our own thought process. In fact, it's so warm out. I got to take this other jacket off. Usually it's so cold. I think it's upper 60s right now, which is incredible. I looked on the radar. I was about to set up outside, and I was like, oh, and I saw a little wetness out there because it rained earlier today, and I was like, oh, crap, I better check. Because sometimes I'll do a show and just try to beat the storm. You know, a lot of times I'm pretty successful at that. But there's a huge one coming. So during this episode, most likely we're going to get some really cool rain noise, which in California is a priceless sound, okay? All right, much better. So what's interesting about this is that, you know, in the subject of aliens, there's a lot of people making money off of it. And, you know, it's entertainment, man. So I support it 100%. They're just trying to, you know, think some possibilities through. I mean, think about it. If you had an unknown that ever reached your planet, okay, it's probably good that we imagineer everything that we could possibly think of as to what they might be like, such that, you know, when they arrive, we're not completely in a state of shock, or we even know what we're looking at. But the stories of Martians and aliens and that kind of stuff's been around for hundreds of years. You know, H.G. Wells, that dude, was around the era that it really just started to take shape. But in my personal travels, meaning the stuff I've read, the stuff I've seen on television, like every single one of you, the theories of alien anatomy tend to be, how do I put this, as sophisticated as we believe the problems that they have to solve are. And I'll explain that in 1 second here. For instance, once we really started to conceive, and again, this is all heliocentric, space exists talk initially, we have a long journey to travel. You know, if we give the aliens credit for hyperspace, which is obviously just a theory, because black holes don't exist, the entire theory of wormholes and, bent space and time and all that stuff. It's romantic, but most likely if space exists, that doesn't exist. Do you have areas in the universe where the ethereal fabric is potentially wound up in some certain shapes that are anything but normal? Oh, maybe. And, could you travel through space where if someone observed you, the light would look like you in the crazy house at a carnival where it's a bunch of misshaped pieces of metal or mirror or whatever, and you're being all distorted. Yeah, it might be like that, and you might actually be completely fine going through that area of space, even though you're wobbling in your shape. You might see what your ass looks like. But it's conceivable. It reminds me of just a beautiful phrase in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when Ford Prefect is trying to tell Arthur Dent what it's going to be like to go through hyperspace, and he says, "Well, it's very much like being drunk." And Arthur goes, "Wow, I rather like being drunk." And he goes, he says, "What's so wrong with being drunk?" is what he says. And the hyperspace starts to happen to them, and he goes, "I don't know, ask a glass of water." And it starts to happen, and then Arthur Dent's phrase as his voice wanders off in the distance is, "I'll never be caught with a gin and tonic again." So when we perceived, and because initially it was just Martians, and we could conceive of a fairly decent, journey from them to us, give them quick engines. Okay, let's just keep it primitive. Maybe they're out a few days or whatever. Say, bring a ham sandwich and a Coke and some water, you're good. But once we started to think about, what if they're coming from another solar system, another part of the galaxy, or another galaxy? Now we're talking about even traveling the speed of light, hundreds and millions of years, technically, for them to travel. And then we have to give them something faster than light, because it doesn't matter who you are, they would have to have some sort of stasis thing for their bodies to stay the same. I mean, can you imagine that? You understand ether so much that you build a craft that's using these ethereal engines, pulling you through space, and then inside you freeze the joint because you understand ether so much that you just pause everything inside. And I don't think that's possible because I think ether has to constantly travel. But let's say they could do it. They could somehow get a loop to happen. So the constantly refreshing ether that you are stays in a perfect loop. And so you could sit there for millions of years just frozen. Imagine that, right? But no one's ever theorized that as far as I know. So what they started to do was to come up with all kinds of interesting things. Whitley Strieber's whole thing, which I'm sure he lifted off someone else for the gray aliens, was that they photosynthesize. That way, if they just have solar radiation, they can make their own oxygen and you're good to go, which is really, much more than that. It's a CO2-based thing. But they would take, just pure sunlight and create this metabolism that needs to occur. Now, it's important to know that, or remind ourselves that anything that's alive has got an ecosystem that's moving. You're constantly refreshing. Right? Even a computer has to constantly refresh its source of electrons in order to have anything resembling a heartbeat, a clock speed. And that is the base anatomy of anything that we consider to be alive. Now, if you take my theories of ether, even a stationary object like a piece of lead is constantly being created while it's in existence, right? So what it is it's the collection of currents that make lead, and then it's been crafted and melted with chemistry in a way that these orbital, currents are the shape of a brick or whatever it is, right? A gold ring. But let's just establish that as a constant, and we know that for the ecosystem of a living, intelligent being, we have a brain, we have various organs that perform duties for digestion, etc., etc. So the theory then, would move around where they said that because ships move really fast and they stop and then they move really fast, someone came up with this theory that the Greys were insect-like, that they had hard ectoskeletons, and the reason why they theorized that was because they hadn't really conceived of inertial dampers. You always hear this in Star Trek. The inertial dampers are out. For those of you who don't know what inertial dampers are, is the ability to take the interior of a ship or a region and quarantine it from the actual relative movement of ether on the outside of the vehicle. So you could take a vehicle moving light speed, stop it on a dime, and everyone inside doesn't feel it. They just feel like they just look out the window and they see stars moving, and then poof, they stop, right? And so in Star Trek, what's beautiful is the inertial damper is about as complex as a gas tank. You know, everyone has one, no big deal. Yeah, it can get messed up. But what is kind of interesting is, and even in the Star Trek episodes that I've seen, you know, the inertial dampers have never failed in a way that everyone's getting suddenly tossed around inside the vehicle, because that would, you know, you have to be extremely careful. There's a relative movement of things inside, but, you know, you couldn't do a lot of things that they end up doing. Nor have I ever seen an episode where gravity plating fails. I think that would be kind of funny. At least one episode, the bridge goes zero gravity, you know. There has been that episode where they find a sweet spot inside the ship where, because of all the relative gravity moving in different vectors, you just float, and it's you can sit on the ceiling. That was one of the things that they dramatized, which is interesting. So the insectoid alien anatomy theory was based on not having any type of inertial damping. Well, if UFOs are the things we think we're seeing that actually have occupants in them and not just like probes of some sort, then that moving wouldn't be an issue. But I would think, too, that the sudden stop and start of a vehicle at the level they're doing, or the claims have been, you would have machinery inside that would just get tossed around really badly. But, you know, who knows? Maybe they figured out how to get it regulated. But if you do have antimatter engines, like Bob Lazar said, that can do ethereal directional voids in space, then I'm very confident that the internals of this vehicle would also have some sort of relative ethereal quarantine up to a point. Now, the other anomaly with the photosynthesizing skin of a gray was that the grays are always known for wearing spacesuits. And again, this is where the theory came that we discovered Velcro from the grays' spaceships during Roswell, and that's how we have Velcro today. The real source of Velcro is a flower. There's a flower out there that has a little dangling hook, and then the other part of the flower has a loop, and the loop embeds, you know, hangs on the hook, and you got it. So there's that as well. But then we get this reptilian thing, which, you know, if you hear like David Icke say, hey, everyone runs the world's a reptilian, the Queen of England's a reptilian. You know, if that's the first time you've ever heard the theory, then you're kind of like, where the hell do you come up with this stuff? You know, I mean, that's like, wow, super duper stretch, right? But 10 years before he came up with that in the 1989 interview, there was the show V on TV. And so you get reptilians in that realm too. Before V, you had a show the kids watched. Now, this is what's crazy. The show called Land of the Lost. For those of you who may not have had it in your country, it's about a family that through some weird anomaly, I can't remember what the hell did it to them, but they got taken back to the dinosaur age. There's more dinosaur indoctrination, right? But they had these pits. It was actually pretty terrifying if you really put it together for a child, but the floor was just this sort of smoky substance. And these fully reptilian, like almond-eyed kind of reptilian alligator lizard face things, more lizard, would come out, and they're called the Sleestaks. And they would come out and terrorize them and then crawl back into the ground. Now, what's really wild about that is the dude in the 90s, and I never can remember his name. He's kind of like a Bill Cooper, but he's not Bill Cooper. he said, and maybe I'll flash his name or something, but some of you know this guy. He said that he was working on a government program to build the network of tunnels all over the United States for the contingency of government plans where you could technically move troops, and you have they talk about having Mach 3 trains down there, and that the channel from England to France was actually pioneered in America, which is probably severely insulting to British people and French people who toiled their own solutions together. But anyway, that they build these tunnels, and that on one of the expeditions, I can't remember where the guy said he was. I think he was in Southwest America, but they had halted the production because they found a chamber underground with, I think the dude was really saying they were grays, but he said that they took an elevator shaft down, like a mining shaft down. He had a dude with him that had a machine gun, submachine gun. He had a 45 on him. His right hand, when he gave this presentation about 1995, was all mangled, and he had burns up. He had a bunch of scars on his body, plus a bullet hole from someone trying to kill him. He's kind of like a big, oafy, nerdy guy, which adds credibility to his story because he's not like a brawler that might have got himself in a weird circle of life, and then he's just claiming a bullet hole was something different, than it what it really was. But he said that his insinuation was the government knew for a very long time that aliens live underneath us, and they live sort of like insects in these, it looks like an ant chamber, right? When they put those little microscopic cameras down to look at termites or ants, except it's at, people level. But he said the elevator went down, and they immediately saw a whole bunch of these things, and he said it stunk. It, had feces in there and stuff. Now, the big question is, what the hell do they eat if they're down there, right? A creature would take food to eat, and the more you have, the more food you need, and what the hell's down there in any ample supply, right? You can't just live on a few earthworms. But he said that this dude next to him panicked and started firing on them, killing some of them, but one of them walked up and put a hand over his chest, and it sent out this beam, which I don't know, you put it over your chest, where's the beam come from, right? Through your hand. I don't know if he thought his story through properly, but he said it fried the dude next to him, and an arc of electricity came across onto him, which is why his right hand was all messed up. But he said he drew his 45 and believes he killed one at least or whatever. But he had all kinds of other weird claims at that event that didn't really make much sense. But he claimed, he had all this stuff. And what's interesting about it is, again, he didn't say they're reptilians, but if you think about the slee stacks from Land of the Lost coming out of the ground, these stories maybe getting, recirculated, regurgitated, redone. And so we just, I got to think of something cool. I know, slee stacks, right? But they're going to be grays instead of reptiles, right? Now, I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why I have a big problem believing in the reptilians, because their anatomy is obviously going to be some sort of bipedal reptilian. And, you can cut open any reptilian on Earth, and they generally have all the same organs that we have. They're just in different shapes, just like everything else that's out there. It's only when you really get into insects do you start having different things other than breathing lungs. You have lung bladders that are inside with perforated holes on their sides, and instead of pumping air, which ours don't really pump air either, but it's a similar chamber. The little pads inside their bodies metabolize the oxygen, and there you go. More oxygen, the bigger the insect. Hence why you have 1-foot spiders in the rainforest, because they're able to breathe more and probably live longer and not have predators of any kind. But if you ever watch Star Trek, one of the most sort of oxymoron things with Star Trek, which is very important when you think about aliens in general, is the notion that you're going to have a super violent race, but you're also going to have like a Klingon. Klingons for me never work because one, like Worf works because he's been raised by human beings, and so he's got that refinement to him. But when you have we've known that, there's human hordes that have done what they've done. Get a little bit of technology. Genghis Khan, he was able to figure out how to build armor and weapons and then train his men and then have tactics. And of course, they're rolling over these villages that have just primitives in them, trying to figure out how to irrigate a field or something. Maybe they can fight you with a backhoe, but that's about it. So that kind of stuff does take place. But when you hear a Klingon talk, you can watch every single episode of Star Trek, every movie of Star Trek. When a Klingon speaks, they seem to lack any refinement of logic and intelligence. They really, really do. But the show, obviously, is trying to create an enemy, an antagonist, never really dealt with that. And if you watch Planet of the Apes, the first two movies in the 60s, you have, obviously, your barbaric, stupid soldier archetype, where they just don't know what they're doing, certainly not like our soldiers today, right? But then you have the orangutan kind of descendants, which are the lighter skin, because they're like red-haired, orangutans are mostly red hair. And they became the wise men that created everything. And so the enforcers, like an ant colony, right? So with the Klingons, you never really have that sophisticated Klingon. There's a sophisticated Ferengi who comes on board and had developed a shield that could survive the sun's, the surface of the sun, basically. So you could park a ship right over the sun surface and withstand coronal mass ejections and stuff. So you got that dimension out of them, right? So when someone starts talking about a reptilian alien race, the obvious goal of that is to talk about a race that is formidable. It's scary, right? Imagine shit, man. Just imagine a race that are made out of gorillas. Holy crap. Smart gorilla race that could just pull you apart with their hands, chew your face off in one bite. Okay. But the reptilians, their garb, their entire body, every time you've ever seen them drawn, it's very Klingon-like. They have the heavier looking, armor on their bodies because they're just supposedly this non-empathetic race of aliens that are just, I guess aimlessly conquering. But the problem is a primitive mind usually lacks any sort of strategy. And strategy would be keystone to creating anything. A strategy to create a weapon will, let's say you create a BB gun. Well, that takes a lot of calm, relaxing scientific thought process to create that. Sure, barbarians can buy it and use it, but where would these, reptilians be able to, let's say the reptilians were invaded by a race that wasn't as physically formidable, and they take over the ship, and it's got like really easy buttons on it, right? Well, once the ship breaks down, needs to be refueled, the guns stop working because the ammo's out, the energy's out, you have a race that can't refill the equipment. They have no idea how it was made. And so the more primitive a race gets in the archetypes of people telling stories, the less I worry about it. Even an insectoid race, it's insects on Earth, although brilliant in their capability of building homes and protecting themselves and surviving, you're still orders of magnitude away from science of true verbal communication with another race. I mean, do you realize Star Trek, I think, did a beautiful job running into weird races in the galaxy and at least being able to communicate in some binary fashion, sending prime numbers or something like that, so you know that someone's thinking through what they're sending you, right? The whole basis of the SETI program was to look for intelligent transmissions. And Tesla was fairly certain that in Springfield, Colorado, he found an alien race that was communicating with the surface, and they blew it off later and said it was just a pulsar. And the pulsar theory is that you have, and it's pulsar theory is really, it's a stretch, man. What they say is that there's a spinning pulsar body in space, and it's so condensed that the atoms are, I forgot which atom is supposed to be its sort of base, but they'll talk about like a star that's all the way down to a proton. They're so condensed down that it's rotating, and as it rotates, it's spitting out on one side of it this emission, and because it's spinning so fast, it goes beep, 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 beep as we see it. So I think that's bullshit, and I think that Tesla, he seemed to abandon the research, which is, I'm hoping this book I'm putting together or reading, getting through, has that in it. Because this book would have been, it's 1919, so it's a couple of years after he came back from Springfield, Colorado. So the reptilian thing, I have my doubts that would be an intelligent race. And if they did get here, their intelligence, once you get intelligent, you tend to get peaceful. When you get intelligent, you tend not to want to destroy life, because you do eventually come up with some sort of first contact policy, maybe even the prime directive, where it's like, we're not to interfere with these people's lives because this is their world. And it's like, there's not a shortage of planets out there you could play with. But there's obviously all of the stories of invasion and that sort of thing. Now, the whole thing about Martians, of course, someone did something about the little green men thing. I think they had a little saying for Tesla to try to ridicule him. And, could you imagine that we've made contact with him and these people are just trying to disinfo the thing? But, man, that would have been 1916, 1917. It would have been pretty early in the game for anyone to know about these beings unless they're already here. But now let's think through the overall physical anatomy of any being in the universe. Now, when I did my second episode on evolution, I started to notice, and a lot of you have, there seems to be like a biological constant in our planet. And because we have those rules that apply everywhere in the universe, not just on our planet, regardless if we breathe oxygen and something else breathes sulfur or any of that kind of stuff, I actually have my doubts. I actually have my doubts that the universe has come up with a whole spectrum of, things that things breathe. Plants are the opposite of us. We're the opposite of plants. That's cool. They're a little bit different than us. But if you really look at the anatomy of all things, you have a node of life. Be it a segment on a crab, a spider, a centipede, a human being, a animal of any kind, we have this round sphere, which is like, again, as my friend said, the default shape. In a liquid environment, initially, you would have this thing floating around, doing its thing, single cell being, and then eventually it can duplicate itself and have a 2-cell thing, and maybe once it duplicates and figures out how to do that, you have a multi-cell amoeba-like thing. But once you have a node, the node would eventually start getting heavier and drift to the bottom of wherever it is. As it's on the bottom, depending on its environment, if it starts getting into more hostile environments with like rocks and rough terrain, if there's any rupture as it's bumping the ground, inner cells in a multi-cell being would start to slip out the hole. And it's going to slip out the hole and probably maintain its life connection to the inside of the sphere for a while. But as it grows a certain length, it is going to start to die, because it's going to taper off to the point it can't grow anything else. And it's probably going to close up its epidermis of some sort. And you have a limb. As there is a nervous system growing into that new region, it might be able to get some muscle tissue in there, and just through inadvertent movement, it starts to live a better life. It starts to be able to move around its environment and perhaps run out of food in one area of the pond. Because it has these little legs, it just wiggles a little bit, little hair follicles, and it gets to the next area. And we know we have multi-celled, creatures in petri dishes with little hair follicles all around. Now, I think hair is a byproduct of the same system that ended up making our limbs. But through a huge number of years or processes, again, even if we have intelligent designers that work on us, the node has seemed to be the default thing that occurs. For every node, you can get 2 legs, and they're symmetrically distributed. So my left leg is on the opposite side of my hip node, and my right leg's, opposite of my left, right? My upper torso node has managed to create 2 limbs, which are my arms. Look at every creature, even though they haven't worked out how to walk upright in most cases, they still have that frontal dorsal node and then the back hip node. On a centipede, well, they've got hundreds of nodes, their little legs, and their nervous system has figured out how to coordinate all that. It's really fascinating. Well, why do we walk upright? That's a big question. The, I think, obvious low-hanging fruit answer is that all of our brain power is up here in the top node, our head. The head doesn't grow legs or arms because it is preoccupied with other symmetrical dual entities, left brain, left ear, left eye, right eye, left nostril, right nostril. Down the center, we've actually been able to merge a hole. We have left teeth and right teeth. Some of us have that little groove down the center of our tongue. So you have the left and the right. So it seems to have managed to pace itself evenly. Look at your vertebrae. Every vertebrae has a left side and a right side. Down the center is the cone, or the hole that carries our nervous system. And so there's a beautiful symmetry. Now, what's interesting about the gut sac of a human being is once you get past the left and right lungs, you start to have a lot of asymmetry. We have one heart, but it has all these different chambers. It's not like a heart that you draw and you give to your loved one on Valentine's Day, right? Your pancreas, your spleen, your liver, your gallbladder, your intestines are a mess, just all over the place. We are distributed evenly in terms of weight. Your stomach's on one side. So it's amazing that we're definitely not going to want to weigh 10 pounds more on the right side than the left side at any point in time in our food ingestion. But technically, we don't eat 10 pounds worth of food, but we are balanced because gravity is always, ethereal winds are always going through us and just kind of keeping an equal force on our insides as well as our outsides. So the reason why I mention that is that I think that, we've seen Starship Troopers, the alien insectoid thing. Well, I guess, but to the degree that the limbs are not sophisticated, how could they create intricate pieces of electronics to get anywhere? Now, being dropped off, like the alien predator thing, where the theory is, this backstory is that the predators created the aliens to have something to hunt that was really, formidable. All right, maybe that sort of scenario works. Someone creating an alien race, dropping it off on a planet, letting that, let the lambs eat all the grass sort of thing, or wear the grass, right? And then exterminate that group or pick them back up and put them in the cage they belong in. And now you can come in and, terraform the place, do whatever you want to do. Maybe, right? But why do we go upright? We go upright because we want this sensor box that's our head to have the greatest vantage point for survival. Our eyeballs are divided into 2 key areas outside of left and right. I think I've told you guys several times, your peripheral vision has a much faster frame rate than your vision right in front of your face. And again, the really easy test is to turn on a ceiling fan, get in your bed, look directly at the fan blades, and they're pretty blurred. Then turn right or left and let your peripheral vision see the fan blades, and you'll immediately see them stop animating in a weird way. They'll start doing butter smooth turns because there's no frames missing from your peripheral vision. Well, that's a huge defense mechanism that you use to survive. Predators coming around your back. Your ears are amazing to hear behind you, but you also have that peripheral vision to help. We don't need to turn our heads 360 like an owl because we just turn, 90 degrees in any direction, our peripheral vision wraps all the way back to see what's behind us. Not complete 360, but it's good enough, right? You're already hearing, the sungrass crunch on one side of your head. So you're going to turn to see what's coming up, what predator's on you. And it's because of these basic laws of survival that would be the truth in whatever planet we're talking about here. Again, doesn't matter what someone breathes. They still, I think, will have a node-based body. I think because we are controlled by the same physics that control the rest of the universe as far as we know, at least in this realm of existence where we are matter-based beings, slow ether, or I would say dense ethereal currents, right? That makes things appear to be solid. They do too. And so I don't think we're going to have aliens ever show up with a tremendously different configuration of limbs. Sci-fi movies love to create, lobster people and all kinds of other weird fleshy things. It doesn't really pan out in the end. Think about how we have been able to use the 5 fingers and the opposing thumb, 4 fingers and opposing thumb, excuse me. Some people have 5 fingers. But to have this hand right here is a big deal. It allowed us to start becoming much more meticulous with our tool-making capabilities. Just look at a gorilla where you have, or at various monkey species, some of them really only have 3 fingers. The koala has 3 fingers and 2 thumbs. Monkeys, they get to a certain point, but they have small brain cavities, and so they can't get to our level. By the way, I saw this video. Somebody on my Facebook feed posted this video where they are now starting to embed what they call spy bots into wildlife situations. And so they made this extremely realistic looking monkey baby and they propped it up in a tree. And I mean, it looks like Hollywood did it. It's an amazing little thing. It doesn't look like the species of monkeys that found it. And I don't know if they're rhesus or not, but they're the ones that are white and they have little raccoon masks. But they ended up finding this baby, spy bot, which has obviously got video cameras for eyes, and it's showing someone back at some observatory. But the eyes were totally real looking, man. It convinced these monkeys that this thing was real. Well, they saw a baby up in the tree without any parents, and so they went to obviously tend to the child, and they knocked it out of the tree, and it hits the ground. Of course, it looks dead as a doorknob because it's just sitting there. And, they can mess with editing to make it have a narrative that's not actually occurring. If the narrative is truly organic and not orchestrated, these monkeys went through an amazing, beautiful moment of trying to revive the baby and then mourning the child. And they grouped together around the baby, and you had, monkeys that seemed to be, more like lovers, that they're of age to do whatever they need to do. And then mothers with their young. And they all took a moment to appreciate life. They would grab each other and hug each other. And it was such a passionate petting that they were doing. It wasn't the normal, let me pick you clean sort of thing. It was like, it was like making eye contact with each other. And they would confirm, I love you. I am so glad you're safe. And then they would turn and look at the little spy bot on the ground that looked like just a horribly dead baby monkey. So I just love those things because it really shows that, love exists, if nothing else, right? It's a real force in the universe that pulls everything together. I mentioned that, little digression, because I think that one of our greatest fears that has been really exacerbated by writers like Whitley Strieber, he's a writer. He's a professional writer. He's extremely good. One of his books turned into Cat People back in the 80s. He's trying to stay employed, right? He's trying to stay relevant. He's trying to sell books. But when he went through his Communion Transformation Breakthrough series, he really emphasized this sentiment that gray aliens had developed to a point where they treated us like lab rats. And of course, that would be the terror of any human, to be treated like a lab rat, which is why a lot of people break lab rats out of facilities. When I worked at the pharmaceutical company I worked for, we had someone raid the place one night and break out a bunch of the dogs that just had a few days to live, let me tell you. But there are other very beautiful stories about grays where people claim they've been abducted. And one of them I've mentioned probably once before. And I'm mentioning this to give us a little bit of dimension into sort of the anatomy that would be present in a being that is intelligent, right? And again, I don't personally believe what I'm about to say is true. I'm just passing this story on because I want you to hear the fiction on both sides of the fence, right? Do I believe Whitley Strieber? At best, again, the most I would ever believe is that guy was abducted once, wants it to happen, and so he's dialing into the frequency of it all. But I think he might just be a really clever opportunist, and he's an entertainer. Again, I was extremely entertained by his books, so I don't put any big moral burden on him to tell the truth necessarily. If he were to create panic with his stories, then that's another thing. But to my knowledge, it's never occurred. But this other story was that someone was getting routinely abducted, and that they were grays, and that they were on a table inside of a room. And the video on YouTube, some of you may have seen this, that someone illustrated it just sort of in black and white, and it was actually really well done. But what they claimed was that there was a woman, I believe, and she was, I think, being impregnated by them. But in addition to being impregnated by them, there was a point in the ceremony where you had some adult-sized grays, and there was no distinction like Whitley makes, which is the females are 6 foot and gray, 6 to 7 foot, and they're tan. Sorry, they're not gray, they're tan. And the men were blue to gray kind of colors. But the story goes on that they went around the corner, and then a beam of, like a ball of light came, and I don't think that they were necessarily carrying it. It was like it could fly through the room on its own. But they would go get this ball of light. And they put the ball of light, I believe the way the story went, into the woman. But what they said was, this is the soul of your baby. And we don't control this necessarily, but this is part of the process. You get impregnated with the biological matter, and here comes the soul that connects with your baby. And you have now met your child before you've met your child, so you're experiencing this very special thing. I thought, if nothing else, to my knowledge, that's never been in a sci-fi movie. I think that's brilliant. I think that's absolutely endearing that they were all happy, and it was like a very beautiful ceremony that was going on. Now there's the alien theory that from the was it the Raelian guy from Paris, from France? His whole thing was that the aliens were absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, sort of Norwegian, tall, perfect humans. Brunette, blonde, and so that makes it pretty easy, right? And the thing is like, if I've done this alien drop-off, this alien gene splicing episode, which I'll have probably out before this one deliberately. But, I think it would make sense, especially if we were dropped off, that they look just like us, within reason. To the degree we have varying races here on Earth, they would probably have varying races on their world. The theory that somehow they're all ground down to one type, and then we're still varying, seems a little bit hard to believe. But what I think is interesting, that even with, the technical, you could maybe call it inbreeding of white people, because, Asians all have dark hair. Black folks all have dark hair. Usually Indian all have black hair. Native Americans had black hair and real black eyes in some cases, which I think is just cool. But white people, no matter how much we inbreed, and there's different invasions that happen that mix everything up, we can create a fairly large group of folks that look similar. Like I can see an Irish girl a mile away. But we still have, 3 major hair colors. We have blonde, brunette, and red hair. No matter how much we, do our thing, we still have these 3 popping up in your family, right? So what I've covered so far is, again, nodal body construction. They do probably have to metabolize some sort of energy source in order to keep a metabolism of life. Not only their food, but, think about it. We eat, but that doesn't take care of our day-to-day breathing. It is a very interesting constant in the universe that something that is alive has some sort of ecosystem. Even a plant must drink water, must, photosynthesize and absorb the CO2 to make oxygen. And it puts off what we breathe. How amazing that we have an opposite correlation, a yin and a yang with plant life. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, right? That's why we have to take care of our plants. That's why you can't demonize the very thing that they breathe. A bunch of stupid children named Greta. But now, the Hollywood world, when we start to, let's say we take alien life and we bring it up to the anatomy of a human being. We have hearing and sight, speech, which again, Greys are always accused of having telepathy. It depends. I often wonder if human beings were to be able to survive the next 1,000,000 years of life, would we get to a point where we would be able to speak telepathically? Again, I've said this study 1,000,000 times. Stanford has proven that children are very telepathic up to about the age of 4, and then all kind of boils away as language, spoken language, replaces their inability to speak and communicate. They have to communicate before they speak, and so they're telepathic with the mother, with the father, right? So that's why your emotions are very, very important around a child. So if you have a very tumultuous personal life and you had a child, you have to find a way to make that child boil away all your problems, and you're like, at least I'm with my son or my daughter, right? But now, where might we go beyond the average 2 of this, 2 of that, 2 of this thing? What would be likely to go over the top? Now, we know that human beings from time to time are born with tails. We do have a tailbone. It looks as if at some point someone might have experimented with the tail. I think that what's interesting is whether we be engineered by God, engineered by an alien race, or engineered by evolution, what is probably the true constant of our design is that we have what we need. It's like the guy said in the Twilight Zone, right? You have what you need. And so the idea would be, we don't have tails because we don't need them. We don't have an extra set of arms because we don't need them. We don't have a 3rd leg. Insert joke there. So I think what we have is a beautiful machine that is our body. To assume that a race that has been around long enough in the universe to be able to get to us, having more than we do, would probably require some epigenetic theories that basically say that being said, man, if I just had eyes in the back of my head, this would solve itself. And there would have to be a profound need for that being to have that thought to potentially create the giraffe neck, Fruit is up high. The theory with, eating fruit that's high, obviously giraffes exist. They're one of the most alien-looking things on planet Earth, besides like a squid or an octopus or the mantis. Look at everything out there. Everything that's out there, besides a spider, I think a spider is a phenomenal thing with 8 eyes on average. They were able to create a brain that was able to deal with 8 legs and 8 eyes. So there's 8 little nervous system nodes inside their little configuration that lets them be very different than everything else. Obviously, insects have, tons of legs, and crabs have tons of legs. So we have that neural pattern in a lot of different things. But it's because, in my opinion, they live in a hostile world. Well, spiders, even the ones that are a foot in diameter, they came from, obviously, spiders that were infinitesimally small that eventually evolved into that big giant spider that's in the rainforest. Because they're living in a non-sophisticated world, they need these things. So there's a part of me that thinks, okay, I'm willing to bet that whatever alien race we were to ever meet is going to have the bare essentials that we have, and then further optimized, which is what almost all the theories of alien anatomy address that issue. The gray, there's two distinct gray illustrations. Again, I'll tell this story again. When I found the book Communion, it was a profound thing for me because I had grown up with Star Trek, with all the shows, with Leonard Nimoy's show, the History's Mysteries, or whatever it was, and other alien shows. And when people would draw the gray sort of triangle front skull, but when they would add this gigantic brain cavity in the back with, some new veiny heads. There's a funny episode in Star Trek in the 60s, in 66, one of the very first ones, I guess it was 67, one of the very first ones ever done, they have this brainy guy. Of course, they're using a human being to play the role. And I had this weird anger that would pop up. And I could never explain it. And I would just get angry. Why the hell am I getting angry at some drawing that someone has made of this alien? When I saw the cover of Communion at a B. Dalton's book and a fucking bargain bin on the side down by the floor, I had this religious experience, man. I was like, that's what they look like. Someone finally got it right. And that's one reason why, and it's not Whitley Strieber drawing it, but whoever the hell that person was that painted it. And Whitley actually was able to create, I believe, a movie for that book. I've seen it. And someone, moved it around. But of course, I think they used a model instead of like a physical model instead of a 3D thing. But its head is very flat relative to these big giant cranium. Of course, everyone creates the big brain because they're trying to insinuate that that's how come they're so smart. Maybe. We have some little kids with little tiny brains that are pretty damn smart. It's all about the configuration, in my opinion. So, but the grays have giant almond eyes, is how they are always drawn. And of course, that insinuates a low light condition wherever they live, or it would have to be, because you wouldn't need gigantic eyes if you were in a world that's as bright as Earth. But what if you took Earth and you moved it out there by Neptune? Okay, sun's a lot smaller, the amount of sunlight you get's a lot less, and just like any sort of creature trying to be a predator in a world that has very little light, all the animals that we know that can see in the dark really well, it's sort of like that theory. I'd love to have that further explained by someone, meaning them. The ears don't exist in terms of the actual outer cartilage. It is a tiny port in the side of their heads. Okay, you don't need it. So just you have better radar interpretation of your audio sensors. Okay, good. The nose is typically portrayed as being very flat and just really has the nostril slits. Okay, makes sense to me. They're also, again, it's supposed to be pretty short. The one I saw in Oxnard, California, which might have been a dream. I was sitting just like I am right now, and the little dude's head, he was standing straight up, was pretty much about, right here to me. And it's a little bit, maybe about as tall as I am sitting. And, his little hand touched my shoulder on my left side. which I remember feeling, which is another thing that's very interesting. In terms of a mouth, they have a slit for a mouth, but they're always rumored as no longer using it. And they also have this tapered chin. This kind of like, it doesn't look like, here's what's interesting. Imagine we cease using our mouth because we evolve to a telepathic realm. Okay. Well, then we wouldn't use our mouth that often unless we had to eat. Now, it's never, again, photosynthesizing, okay, whatever. What are they going to do? I guess I have like a little tanning lamp inside the vehicle, but they're covered in a silver suit. So how does that work? In terms of maintaining life, it just depends on the overall biomechanics of their aging process. It could be that they don't need to eat very often. There's quite a few creatures on Earth that can go a fair distance without eating. But it seems to be a constant on Earth, and anything that doesn't eat does die. And so it would seem that we have to sort of supplant that. But here's what's interesting to me. Let's just say someone completely thought up at some point that we don't know this gray alien theory. I don't know, honestly, the Roswell crash, let's say that did occur, and there's one recovered that's fairly decent, and the other two are mangled, right? One's horribly mangled, and we don't know how bad the second one was mangled, who was dying. Someone comes up with this gray alien refinement of the idea of an alien. First time I ever saw anything remotely like a gray was in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but I definitely seen shows on TV prior to that movie where it did have sort of the same exact looking thing. Now, the one in the movie is very interesting because it was infant-like, which it appeals to the human mind on a level of maternal instincts and paternal instincts, right? You're trying to create an alien that looks fragile, and so the mind wants to reach out like a puppy dog or like a kitten, and you immediately side with it because you're like, "Ooh, are you okay?" That kind of thing, right? But for those of you who remember the movie really well, one of the aspects of that scene when the door opens, and because the door opens twice, first time it opens, everyone who's been lost in the Bermuda Triangle and other anomalies in the world starts to file out. So all the pilots, to them it was only a few minutes sort of thing, but it had been 40 years or 30 years or whatever. Then it closes back up, and then it opens again. And when it opens the second time, the original cut of the film, if I'm right, shows it's much better in the second cut. As I remember, maybe I have that wrong. Maybe I just didn't remember it as well. I still remember seeing that movie one time in the theater, and I remember walking out of the theater going, that was a great film. And I was like 8 years old. It was the first time I really thought about it. I mean, I'd seen Star Wars a year previous and just was so blown away. I didn't think about production value or anything like that. But this big sort of motherly spider-legged thing, it still had 2 legs and 2 arms, but it was this armature puppet that was very tall. You couldn't really get the scale of it that well. It was like the mother came out first, checked the place out, and then the kids came out. And of course, in real life, it was a bunch of kids dressed in alien outfits, and hats off to these kids, man. They did a great job kind of bouncing around a little bit in these crazy outfits. Of course, Richard Dreyfuss walks out in his red suit to take off with them. They're all circling him and touching him, which was just brilliant because it's kind of like, in one realm, it's like they had already seen human beings. Obviously, a bunch of them just came out of the mothership. But it was like it was their way of greeting him and making him feel comfortable. We're going to touch you so you're familiar with us. And I just thought it was great, right? But think about it. Once the theory at some point turned into the book cover of Communion, even if this whole thing's fictional, it's just man trying to explain something that may end up occurring. We're so alone in the universe that we're doing this because we have to. They they did all these interesting refinements to the aliens' makeup, meaning their biology, and it tends to make sense. You would shrink the jaw because the jaw doesn't have the use that our jaw does. We have to crunch stuff and make it prepare it for the stomach so we don't choke to death, get it down our esophagus. And so we have, big mandibles and, we're canine teeth and we can flat Mike Tyson shit down our throat, right? The ear refinement, I think, is interesting because instead of making smaller ears for a smaller being, they just got rid of them. And, supposedly it was like a little ridge or something, but pretty interesting little thing there. Now, the almanized, again, I don't know. It can't just be because the spaceship is dark inside, right? Because you evolve your whole world into a weird eye-looking thing. Some other fringy theories about gray aliens is that the whole thing is a suit. I've never heard that really asserted by many. The other one is that, of course, they are nothing more than robots being sent here by, like, kind of biological robots, sort of like a replicant in Blade Runner, so they have fleshy sort of things. But when you really hear about the Roswell crash and get into it, these were very sentient beings that got here, and they're dead bodies. Because the thing is like, come on. I hate to go into Roswell again, but we're here. The coroner who served the Air Force Base got the call for 2 child caskets. Now, I've heard it upgraded, recently that they wanted hermetically sealed caskets, but that's absurd. I don't think those were something you just buy. I think either it seals or it doesn't seal. But hermetic sealing is a very certified process. If you hermetically seal windows for your house, you're paying extra, right? So I'm not sure. I would imagine that caskets are pretty damn tight and hermetically sealed anyway. So making that distinction, if it's a standard feature, seems a little bit absurd. But anyway, he was contacted for 2 child caskets. That's a matter of fact. Okay. Well, the other cover story for the Roswell crash was that about a week or 2 before the Roswell incident, there was an accident where I think 1 or 2 aircraft crashed, just doing some regular flight tests. Now remember, this is 1947. So I can't remember. I think you have the Mustang and you have a few, like the copy of the Zero, but you don't have F-15s and F-16s and any of that kind of stuff. Jaeger hadn't broken the sound barrier yet. So what they had said was, no, what they actually found out in the desert was the crashed pilots, and they had been mangled by animals. So when people got out, they couldn't recognize what they were looking at. Come on. If that was the case, then they would know it's human beings, because you can look at a femur bone and a skull and whatever. You're going to know it's a human being, even if it's picked dry. And it's never going to fit inside of a child casket. And you don't get caskets, you get body bags, right? And you don't have to do much of an autopsy on these folks, because they're just simply collateral damage of military testing. So I think some of that's a bunch of crap. But anyway, so you have the coroner who was the one that got involved and ended up going to after getting the call, selling the caskets, he ended up going to the hospital, meets his friend who's a nurse, and she's part of the 3-man crew that's doing the autopsy on the other 2. And because the bodies were supposedly full of sulfur, part of our anatomy conversation here, that they were getting sick and throwing up. Not sick and throwing up because they were disgusted by what they saw, but because they were physically getting, nauseous from ingesting this non-oxygen particulate. Now, what's interesting to me is that out of all of the aliens that we've ever had prophesized to us or illustrated outside of Hollywood, okay, the Greys have been the most sustained alien race that I have ever heard mentioned. The reptilian thing, okay, is typically associated with shape-shifting, all right? And, the whole thing about shape shifting, since it does demand an anatomy explanation, would be, part of it's one of these things of like, okay, yeah, the royal family's got freaking reptilian statues at Buckingham Palace, man, with like melded with humanoid females, So, I mean, there's something going on there, something they believe, because why the hell would you put that crap there? Just make, it's the royal family of Windsor, the Saxe-Gothberg family. You've got infinite relatives that you could turn into statuettes, or you could just do the standard gargoyle or lion or something, whatever, with a unicorn, every dragon, what their family crest is made out of. So creating these things is really strange, but shape-shifting, let's think about it. David Icke, in his theory, launched in 1989, was that the royal family of Windsor are really reptilians. And, anytime someone watches an interview through a low bandwidth compression on YouTube and the face starts doing, guessing game of the pixels, because you don't have all the pixels coming through the pipeline, they say that people are transforming into reptiles. Please don't follow that crap, right? The reason why an eye goes from circular to slit is because they don't have all the pixels to make up the pupil correctly in the eye, and so it guesses the next pixel, and one of the things that we'll do is just average a scan on the eye to make the upper and lower part of the eye, which didn't come through, takes the center of the eye and repeats it above and below, but it also will squish it, taper it above and below, because you actually have the flesh color of the eyelids. And so it's something that I've seen 1,000 times in compression software that I was involved in the 90s, and we were trying to figure out JPEG compression. So again, for those of you who want to know the details, you have, your GIF and your ping store pixel data with RGB values. The ping is where it went up to, billions of colors. You can put a 24-bit ping together, and it's, we don't even have eyeballs that can see that stuff. When you're dealing with JPEG, and then you deal with lossless JPEG 2000 video encoding technology, which everything else borrows from, you're dealing with light wave information, CMYK data, that then it does exactly what CD players used to do, which is fuzzy logic to say, if your CD back in the 80s, and it does it today too, if you have a scratch on it, what it would do is skip the scratch and then average the tone of music between the last two bits that it knew. And it started to create some really weird sounds, and so they ended up blacking out the sound instead of playing guessing. Same thing was happening inside VHS tapes, where when it lost the data on the tape because it started wearing off, they would put a white pixel in its place, and so then you would have white streaks all over your old videos, and then they realized that really makes everything look like crap. When they switched it to black, then all of a sudden you barely noticed. Like, that's it, So don't get caught up in that particular part of the reptilian theory. But shapeshifting. Well, I've seen some pretty HD photographs, especially recently with Press Andrews issues of the Queen. And, these are super high definition images of all of her, facial features and what have you. And you got movies of the whole family getting together and doing their thing. I mean, imagine, according to David Icke, it's the Windsor family has the reptilian thing going on, shapeshifting. Princess Di's family does not. So when Princess Di sleeps with Charles to have her first child, he would be half reptilian, half human. So wouldn't that mess up his shapeshifting capabilities? And all the other families that marry into the British family would also be creating hybrids. So the theory breaks down there. And then, of course, was it Prince Henry or Prince Harry? I can never remember the redhead kid. His father's actually the security detail guy that took care of Princess Di. So he's not a Windsor at all. He is half of his mother and half of this other dude who's sort of vanished out of the limelight. So he wouldn't be shapeshifting at all. So the whole theory is pretty bad, okay? But, okay, so forever, the big question is, you're a reptilian, how are you a 5-foot woman? And then how are you a 6'2" man? How does that happen? Because there's always this volumetric issue of how would a spoon turn into a car, and how would a car turn into a golf ball, right? You got to figure out where to put all of your organized currents, which make you who you are. And then, of course, they're trying to tie it back to a physical race, which is the reptilian race. Okay, well, the second you commit to being something in this universe, a reptilian, an insect, alien, a gray, or something, then you're committed to the currents that are who you are. All right, you own the currents for the time being that make you who you are. No matter if you live 1,000 years or 100 years or 50 years, that's your game. So I would say that the only theory I can possibly come up with is mixing a couple things together. And there's a third, that is even more intense. But we know that in the atomic world, there's more space than there are forces. Okay. So in terms of volumetrically shrinking, it's like the old theory of the incredible shrinking woman with Lily Tomlin back in the day. You're just condensing the space down to a tighter pattern, but then you still are who you are, sort of thing. All right. You can accomplish that if you can alter, I think, the overall orbit of your currents that make you who you are. Okay. You're still going to get a lot of more banging and interruptions the smaller that you get. Now, the other theory would be that there are female reptilians that are small and male reptilians that are huge, like normal human, like normal 6-foot man kind of thing, right? I shouldn't say huge, but bigger. Then the third thing is you would have to have, this amazing mind to synthesize and control the emulation of someone. You'd have to, if you're going to think it up all by yourself, and I'll give you a little analogy here that if any of you have been an artist in your lifetime, you'll know exactly what I'm saying here. The difference between having a real-life person in an art studio posing in front of you or having a photograph of someone and then merely mimicking that onto the canvas or on a piece of paper through illustration is much easier in most cases than completely creating a fictitious person with all the same nuances and details of a real living being. For instance, drawing a fake face, well, I've done it a million times. However, what I've never done is drawing a photoreal face with all the little cracks and nuances of age that these people being photographed a million times have been able to successfully accomplish. The other thing that's interesting about the whole theory is if you have to consciously exert any energy or mental capacity to achieve this illusion, to change your shape, you would have to concede that it's something that is like, it's something that you would commit to and be able to forget so that you would never have to think about it again until you need to switch back to whatever the hell you're supposedly really are, which is some lizard thing, right? Now, for me, I think that the reptilian mind and the rumor that Princess Di called them the lizard people is, because here's the thing. If they were lizard people, Princess Di was not bashful about telling the truth. She was in so many places in the world where even though she had her armed guard, which worked for the Queen, and they have a secrecy act and all this other stuff that you have to abide by, I think she would have dropped the hammer way before she died. For sure. So I don't think she ever saw them switch, if that rumor is even true, right? It's really easy to make rumors about people when they're dead, But I think the reptilian thing comes from the fact that reptilian mind, as defined by Carl Sagan, was that you have a human being with no empathy. And we know for a fact that that's how they raise their kids. That's how that show The Crown on TV, which is a fictional thing, and they get all the scripts, I think, vetted by the Queen, the Queen's men that take care of the scripts, right? Charles's whole upbringing was sending him off to a boarding school where he's got to learn his manners and learn all of his royal, etiquette. And you're taking your child away from its parental unit. The parent is a king and not really a king, but a prince and a queen. And so their duties are all encompassing. So they can't be with their children. So they can't care about their children, and their children can't really care about their parents. They are servants to their regime. Servants to the people, if it's convenient, yes, right? We know what kings and queens do. They pay as much attention to the people as they need to, and then all the rest of the time is spent doing whatever they want to do. Some are more active than others, but they all end up with, Jimmy Savile's in their back pockets and Epstein's in their closets, right? So I think we do have reptilian people, but it's not physical, right? Now, the thing with David Icke, this isn't really tremendously related to our conversation, but when questioned, especially by Jesse Ventura, who I think was extremely rude to David, why take a great mind like David and be rude to the guy? I don't get it. You don't have to believe what someone else believes to have a great relationship, friendship, conversation, acquaintance. For me, it just is such a waste of a human interaction, But of course, Jesse's producers thought he was an asshole too. But they asked him, he's been asked several times about it, have you seen a reptilian? And think about how easy it would be for him to lie. Yes, and he comes up with some elaborate story. But every single time he's asked that I've ever heard him answer, he always says no. But that he says that after revealing that these beings exist, that people come up to him and tell him that, I think the famous one was, the one I've heard a lot, at least 2 or 3 times from him, which is a lot, was that a woman was being pulled over by a police officer for some traffic stop, and she was being a little ornery with the guy, and he got mad and yelled at her, and that when he did, he lost his shape for a split second, and that, according to David, after one of his shows or during a break or something, that this woman came up to him and said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I had the most horrific experience where a cop yelled at me and his whole face went to a different shape." And I get the sense that she didn't really have it linked to a reptilian, but that she saw a shape change and she was like, "Oh my God," And then when he explained his theory, she jumped on board. And again, to his credit, we are obsessed with dragons. Again, that shaman in Africa, was it Zimbabwe? I don't know. Zulu Nation guy. He had the trinket with the reptilian male with the phallus stuck through the genital region, reproductive region of a girl, a woman figure on this necklace. And then the necklace was supposedly over 700 years old. They're not quite sure how old it is. And so, we have artifacts where there seems to be someone capable of rendering what they see, and they're doing reptilian lizard-headed humans with these almond eyes, essentially embossed in the head region. Now, here's what's fascinating for me. The Egyptians, which again, they had, I forgot what it's called. It's a really weird word, but the word when you create a humanoid body with a animal head. There's a name for that, and that's obviously the anatomy of most of their gods, if not all of their gods, right? So Anubis is an anteater, and Ra was like a falcon head sort of thing. They have no reptilian heads, as far as I can remember. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I don't remember any reptilian heads. And they lived in sort of a lush area at the time, but they had deserts on both sides, so you'd think they would have run into that idea. Hey, we haven't used this one yet. Oh yeah, put together a reptilian head. So some part of me thinks they would have done it. However, what they did do was they have the whole theory of the third eye. And right over the third eye of a pharaoh, only a pharaoh, what's up there? It's a cobra. Okay, a snake. A reptilian. A cold-blooded creature. Interesting. The gateway to the mind was through a snake. There is at least one hieroglyph out there, and there's several hieroglyphs where they show the pyramid beaming light. It seems like rays of light off the pyramid. Now, if they were truly white, red, and black, then the white one would have been really hard to look at because you would just be blinded looking at this thing. So maybe that's what they were symbolizing. But there is one that seems like it goes straight down into the Parameridian stone and then straight at the pharaoh's head, as if it is receiving information from outer space. Very fascinating. Again, the Mayan illustrations and the Aztec stuff, you have these incredible illustrations that look like guys are in spaceships. Maybe it's a spaceship, maybe it's not. It's definitely some weird machine. That's just really strange. It looks like, I think one of them looks like they have little engines blowing fire below. So let's talk for a split second before I finish this stick here. So there's interdimensional alien theories, which remove a tremendous amount of the burden of any of this stuff with trying to survive long space flight. That's where you might get your gray with the almond eyes. The dimension they live in could be dark as compared to ours. Imagine you just wiggle a few dimensions over and the photon energy, the verb that comes from the sun, isn't penetrating their dimension. It's slightly off from ours, and so they need it, right? Then there's people who take DMT. They get approached by grays almost unanimously, and it's like we're wiggling our mind, our consciousness into their realm. It's just a drug trip for us, but then we start to astral project into their world, go to the center of the universe, see all kinds of wild, spiritual beings out there. So, I got a buddy of mine, it's been on so many trips, he's not going to go on any more trips. And I think there's also a question here that is about the sort of estimation of how many years does an intelligent life like us, again, all things are intelligent, of course, but where you start to develop, burial rituals and technology, you really start creating tools that not only aid survival, but make it more luxurious. And you take away problems. And I'll give you an example here on Earth. The very first time that man stopped living on riversides, they had created the bucket. The bucket allowed them to carry water because they saw their hands do it, hand to mouth, hand to mouth. And they said, wow, if we can just kind of start making some of these things, we could drag water in places that we don't have a stream. And we could live away from the stream. Maybe predators who go there to drink started eating them up, and they realized, let's go a little bit inland. Let's go uphill. We have a vantage point of being higher than them. We started developing shelters. The shelters were on the ground initially in all kinds of weird configurations. And then we realized that if you just lift it up, a few feet, then when it rains, you're not living in the river that's underneath you. Plus, a predator has to come up to you, and stabbing a thing in the face is a hell of a lot better than stabbing it in the stomach, right? Oh, I also wanted to say about the theory of the nodes, just because I missed it. Think about a node in a world with a sun. The sun is beating down on its back. The environment and the wind is always beating down the back. So you would start to develop your protective system on your back, and your stomach, which is always guarded by the ground, can be very malleable and vulnerable, which is why the stomach is usually a very, vulnerable place for all creatures. An alligator It's on its stomach. We'll look at its back of its body. It's an armor plate, So there's got to be a point, and there's been several scientists and I guess anthropologists that have tried to take a stab at this, and I think they've done a beautiful job at trying to figure out what would we consider to be the minimum invention of an intelligent race. SETI, it went on the theory that radio waves are of any kind, of any frequency, would be a really good sign of intelligent life. They're broadcasting to each other, but because stuff can escape into space, they think they can find those frequencies, and especially if they did space travel and space communication between ships, some of that would drift towards Earth and not get frayed by the fabric of the universe, which is ethereal winds. I have my doubts. It's finally starting to rain here. With Star Trek, obviously the pinnacle moment was man inventing warp drive. And what's amazing about that story for me is that it is not only a technology that is being discovered, it is the fact that now you're going to be traveling potentially in backyards of folks that have been there before you, and you have to join some sort of alliance because there's rules. They have the problem in Peru where the sort of indigenous tribes that haven't really developed any technology are starting to procreate, and they get too big and they get into the sophisticated world of normal neighborhoods, and so they have to chase them back. I'd hate to think that they actually hunting them back in their population. The other one that's sort of between radio waves and light speed is atomic weapons. So once you're capable of splitting an atom and creating a gigantic explosion, imagine splitting a gram of antimatter turned into a bomb is like 50 megatons, 43 to 50 megatons. Yeah. You can start disrupting their world. There are all these stories about missile silos having their missiles disabled after seeing a UFO overhead. Very interesting. For me, that would speak to either interdimensional reality, where, can you imagine, like in Nevada, where you have Groom Lake, Area 51, prior to 51 turning into what it is today, they're just blowing up stuff out there in Utah. Blowing up stuff. Well, imagine in the other dimension, there's a city there. There's aliens there. They don't bump into us. We don't bump into them because they're on a different plane of existence. But all of a sudden, we split an atom. And their world blows up just like ours. And they suffer. We're just blowing up dirt. But they're losing life. And so they end up spending some time and figuring out what the fuck just happened. And they're like, oh, it's this group of primitives in the other dimension. We got to get in there, slow this stuff down. Well, let's say that these things are real. I know some of you don't think atom bombs are real, and I think there's some definite questions there. Once you study the Bikini Island catastrophe, I think you'll realize that TNT would not have had the problem that they had in Bikini Island. In Bikini Island, for those of you who don't know, they used a fuel, and I used to know all this data. I've forgotten it because I don't care. But one of the fuels that was supposed to remain inert went active because during the explosion it moved some of the orbital patterns of the atoms around, and it turned into an atomic fuel, and the thing blew up way bigger. They don't even know what magnitude it ended up, but it ended up traveling clear over to the actual station where they were monitoring it, and they had to get the hell out of Dodge because it was really bad. So if it's TNT, that would have never happened. So go look that one up. But imagine that this atomic bomb thing occurs. And, we dropped 2 of these things before we had done that much testing because we were in such a freaking hurry to do it, right? But now we start, above ground testing from 45 to 73 before we put a moratorium on above ground testing. That's a very long time. But what if you were the aliens getting hurt by this in some other dimension? then you're going to have two options, maybe three. Three is extinction of us, but two would be turn them all off. But then you find out that we've got Russia and the United States cranking these babies out by the hundreds. And so your only bet at that point is to contact the governments, quite literally, landing on their backyard and go, okay, here's the deal. Every time you blow one of these things up, you're hurting our people, or we don't like this in our dome that we built for you. So you're going to have to stop this. You can go ahead and play your people with atomic weapons. You can tell them you've got them. You can tell them you're doing, below ground testing or whatever, but you can't do atomic anymore. And so it all gets shut down. Whatever you see is an illusion after that point. Again, continuing to say that North Korea has one is just so painful to my brain. They do not have nukes, okay? And I'm not convinced any other country has them besides the United States and Russia. Countries say they have them because it makes you fear them, right? So just name every other country. I'm not convinced. Are they invited to watch? Can we give them partial credit for a particular detonation so they can go back home and go, France has them too, Great Britain has them. Okay, well, where's your tests? Oh, well, France did a bunch of tests in the ocean and stuff. Maybe. So we'll see. So it seems like there's a decent theory and connection between us being able to blow up the universe, and because when you just keep tapping into bigger and bigger bombs, bigger and bigger cause and effect models of chemistry, and eventually you could go to their peaceful planet that's all utopian and start blowing the place up just to take it over. And so they're like, look, we did what Tesla said, which was we created plenty of things to stop you if you get this technology. Let's hope that if they exist, that is their track record with us already, just to keep that from ever happening. So to surmise this whole thing, my belief system is fairly firm. They're going to be very much like us because of the rules of the universe. Based on where they live, obviously some things are going to be more developed than others. They may have gone through the same evolutionary development that we've gone through. Imagine, and this has been theorized before. What hasn't been theorized before? We look at all of us here on planet Earth, and we're all different shapes and sizes and colors and what have you. But we know that if we survive 1 million years, we will inbreed so much that eventually we turn into gray. We turn into whatever the amalgamation is of all of our skins together, unless people who live in Africa simply get thicker, darker skin because of their exposure to the sun. Now, there's plenty of white people who live in South Africa and jungles and stuff, deserts, and, Australians haven't turned black just because they lived there for several hundred years. So if this process takes place, it takes a really long time. But let's just say we do get to the point where hair, it's just a pain in the ass, so we don't grow it anymore. Our mouths, well, we figured out ways of eating without consuming food, make all the vegetarians and vegans happy in the world. So our jawline gets a little smaller. You see someone who's lost their teeth, the bone density, calms down a little bit, and you get that different shaped jaw. It makes sense. In terms of our eyes, well, we probably wouldn't develop almond eyes unless for some weird reason we have to live underground for an extremely long time. Let's hope that doesn't happen. As far as our overall size, what determines the size of a human being on Earth? Well, I think it's very fascinating that still on Earth we've got gigantic Norwegian people and really tiny Latin folks. Probably not technically Latin folks, but the more indigenous races of South America. Some areas of China do have smaller people. Some areas of Japan have smaller people. But they still have folks the same size as everybody else. And of course they have some world record tall people as well. But they're usually related to an organ not performing properly, which is why we have giant humans as well sometimes. I think that in the overall spectrum of time, The only thing that makes us tall or short is the gravity of where you live. Now, I know some of you think the world's a different shape than round. I don't know what we would do with that particular theory in this thinking. But if the world is truly expanding 19 centimeters a year, as tracked by Geneva, until they found out that was revealing that oil is not a fossil fuel, and that's what fuels the world's economy, and they erased the 19 centimeters, which is insane, because it does do it. You know, a ball is 24,000 miles around, 7,900 miles diameter, growing 19 centimeters. You realize how much new material is being introduced to the core of the Earth from the sun to do that? I mean, it's a tremendous amount. You know, if dinosaurs truly existed, okay, and you should go look up Neil Adams' Expanding Earth, little 3.5-minute thing on YouTube. Just look up Neil Adams' Expanding Earth. He rolls back the age of the Earth, and it's 100% perfect. All the continents connect on all sides, and it's about 25% the size of the Earth today. Well, that would mean 25% of the gravity. Then you theoretically could have gigantic insects, gigantic beings, because they don't weigh as much as they would today. If that's true, which I don't think dinosaurs existed, because the other thing that goes away and back in their time frame is the lush vegetation. It's even theorized that lush vegetation was something after them, which is why when Disney made the movie Dinosaurs, it's a desert world. It's funny, for the most part. And it was even publicized that this was so accurate. You know, it was like, well, what the hell is a brontosaurus eating, right? It's got to eat like 2 truckloads of greens every day, and it's going to die. These things can't exist. But anyway, smaller world, bigger people. Bigger world, smaller people. For those of you who have studied the giants, I will do an episode this season about the giants. You know, up to 25-foot giant skeletons that the Native Americans showed the Europeans, who then took the bones to the Smithsonian, wrote a bunch of papers and books on them, and then lost them. Lost all those bones. Okay, what's the big threat, man? They're already gone. It's not like, I mean, and the funny thing is that it probably jostles a little bit of their evolutionary theory, but why not just fold it into evolution and go, oh, okay, well, these evolved too big and they didn't survive. See, being smaller is better. Yay for humanity. By the way, I just saw a movie tonight that was Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones in the movie Ad Astra. And I have to say, it's about space travel. I can't really talk about the overall ending arc of the movie because it's a spoiler. But if you like this kind of conversation, there is a tiny slice of what they were driving towards in terms of the theme of the entire movie that does kind of belong in this conversation. Maybe next season I'll talk about it, or maybe before the end of this season I'll spoil that one out. But I want to say, just as a total digression, I think Brad Pitt has finally become an actor. When I saw him in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I thought for the very first time I've seen him act pretty perfectly from start to finish, and really act. And in this film, he really acts. I thought he was pretty good in 12 Monkeys, but then he was kind of a caricature of a human being, so you got a lot of leeway with that sort of thing. But now he's playing more literal characters that have to have a certain disposition. Of course, Tarantino allows some craziness to occur, but his role in that movie was even very tempered and I think very professional. I did not like him in Inglourious Bastards, but that's because I grew up around the people he was trying to imitate. I think he did too. I think he grew up in Missouri, I thought. But I thought it was such a bad impersonation. It just, every time he talked, it just made me realize I was watching a movie, which is not what I ever want to think I'm doing. But I'd definitely be interested in any of the research you guys have done. Most specifically, if there's any theory that sticks in your head, right? The ones that stick in your head are the ones that have some sort of unresolved logic or complete logic that I haven't mentioned already. And drop that in the comments. Any videos that you like, drop them in. By the way, I want to thank a lot of you for doing exactly what I'm asking you to do. I've got probably a dozen videos to click through and watch just from the last several episodes I put out. I'd like to know if you guys think that they would be like us, bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, pretty much the same configuration and skull. And if you have any theories beyond that, I'd be interested in hearing it explained as to why, because design that's intelligent, or evolution, which is also the brute force design of intelligence, it's going to weed out anything unnecessary. So, what's really fascinating to me is that no bipedal, well, nothing big besides the fake pterodactyl. I mean, what a joke that thing is, right? Other than the fake pterodactyl, we don't have any, well, I guess we have some theories of the big thunderbirds, which were there's a lot of birds that are massive, right? So you got birds that are like 10-foot wingspans, but they have feathers. They're a bird, right? So they're the only thing that gets the privilege of flight. A bat is kind of weird. And that's, I think, a lot of people get the pterodactyl theory. Well, look at this thing. It's hairless. It's featherless, and it flies. So why can't a pterodactyl fly? It's like, well, the wings aren't big enough and all this other stuff. But we don't have like flying bears. We don't have flying Pegasus. We don't have anything that's flying. So it's as if the engineering of a wing was one of the most specific things that happened by either our designers or evolution, because we have insects and birds that fly, and nothing else found it interesting to fly. And I think it has to do with perhaps the engineering of a wing. But when I see an eagle grab a dog and fly off, right? Well, the dog weighs the dog weight. They're not grabbing like, Great Danes, but they're definitely grabbing dogs that are between 30 and 50 pounds and no problem at all flying off with the dog. So it seems as if, if the wings are that strong for pickups like that, then I'm a little shocked that we don't have winged animals that are just, like I said, anything that's out there, a cat, a dog, perfect size to fly, right? Smaller than a big bird, right? And a part of that just, in my mind, loosely links back to the idea of intelligent design. And that phrase and that category has been largely likened to God, and only God, intelligent design. For me, I have a definite belief in God. I think that for me, it could be as simple as the organized energy of the universe itself, maintaining all the physics and laws that we live by, which makes it possible for me to communicate with you right now. An alien designing us, some people go, well, that's stupid because God designed us. And it's like, well, okay, well, in my mind, it's just a food chain. God designs the alien, and the alien gets to design us. We are Frankensteining crap together all the time on planet Earth, so we do it. Again, people forget what we do and what we would do if we could do it, and what we're probably going to be doing if the current technology we're working on continues to move in a particular direction. It's really strange. I don't get it. I just want to emphasize, as I'm finishing off the last half inch of the cigar, as we learn in this world, unfortunately, everything is sort of taught to us in a closed paradigm. I'm giving you the answer, the teacher says, and it's this. And at no point are you to question what I say. You're not to research anything else outside of what I say. So everything that we're saying to our kids, it's largely just boxing in their brains. And obviously that's something that people who control us love. So I think that on one level, as a parent especially, we have to make sure our children, when they come home from school, imagine this. When you're a parent, you get into loops, man, with your kids. It's just something that happens. No one needs to feel bad. But we get into loops. Okay. But imagine you're asking your child what they learned today. And if you set them up before they go to school And I'm not sure exactly what words to use. I haven't had a young one in a long time. But making sure that you send them to school going, okay, here's what's about to happen. They're going to teach you a bunch of things that you need to know. Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Those things are just cut and dry. But when they get into sciences, they're going to teach you things, and in their mind, they're right. And that there's only one way to do everything that they teach you. However, every day you come home from school, you can come to me and ask me a question, but I'm also going to ask you what you learned today. And after you tell me, there might be some categories, might be some things they teach you, where I'm going to give you other possibilities. And that way you keep the gates open. Your kid knows, all right, this little ritual has happened a few times. I went and learned something from school, and my mom and my dad took me aside and gave me some other ideas. Maybe even prep them, because, I mean, believe me, man, the best thing you can do is talk to your child like they're an adult. And I don't mean mean or, stern or weird. Just treat them like they're super intelligent, because they are. And they will become more intelligent as you treat them like an adult, because the other thing is you're showing them respect. Even though you're new to this world and you haven't experienced everything your mom and dad have experienced, you can go research things. You can learn how to read a lot faster than the other kids. You can get deeper into mathematics than kids. My dad started teaching me algebra in 3rd grade. And, the equal sign and whatever's on one side has got to match the thing on the other side, but it's 2 different equations, and you just got to simplify them down. And I went to school and started. It was just easy. It was strange. It was never hard, because my dad didn't say, okay, this is really hard, and I'm going to show it to you first because it's really hard. No, he just showed it to me. And he showed it to me, and I think he was saying it was easy. And it was like, okay, it became easy in my brain. So you have that power for your kids. It's very dramatic. And if you're a grandparent, then just pass it down to your grandkids. But the other thing that we have to do as adults is go back and audit everything that we were taught, that we were, it's one way and that's the way it is. You know as well as I do, doctors are being taught dogma about how the human body works. Why haven't we got cures to cancer that's just, you go to the store where you buy mouthwash, there's the cure to cancer right next to it? Because they've turned it into a business. And there's 2 factors to this. There's the corporation that runs oncology clinics doing it. It's always chemotherapy, right? Get more cancer to solve cancer. It's just so stupid, right? But the other one is they don't teach the doctor how to think for themselves. There's so much to learn to be a doctor. When do you have time to think for yourself? You're just trying to pass the next test until you get out to do your internship, and then you're with a bunch of closed-mind people that are being interns. Where is medical science still very innovative? Surgeries, reconstructive surgeries, where you've got someone who's been shot in the face with a shotgun. You got to rebuild their whole face. Everything's a unique game on how it's going to work. Brain surgeons, they're always thinking up new things. If you go watch that show, The Nick, which stands for Nickelodeon, the hospital in New York. It's the turn of the century, 1900, and they're trying to pioneer surgeries. And you see these guys, whether it's fictional or not, this is what was going on. They would have conferences where these doctors had figured out how to perform surgeries that no one had ever performed in history. And they were having to create their own medical instruments to accomplish a lot of these tasks. So they would go, one thing we can't do is take 2 arteries and cut it and then make them go back together. So they developed a tool to do that, So just as a little Chotsky in your brain, again, what is it? A sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Look at Star Trek. All of the medical lab stuff where they're just, waving this little thing over you, and it's reading out on the tricorder as to what's wrong with you, and it's just a probe that's hitting you with a beam that's obviously not doing you any harm, but it's bouncing off of the tissue, subdermal, external, whatever, and they're going, oh my gosh, yeah, you got this problem. it should just take a couple of this and that, a little shot here, a little this and that. Heal bones, right? Everyone's breaking their arms on Enterprise, playing that game. It was like Tom Jaunt or John Todd or whatever the hell it is, right? It's like racquetball game or whatever, and people breaking their elbows and their arms, and they just come in there, and Dr. Beverly Crusher, she puts this thing on them, fixes their bone. She says you'll be sore for a couple days, but you'll be fine after that. Thanks, Doc. See you later. Magic. We've lost the entire initiative in several areas of science. And because you have to get grants, the people that hold the purse strings are our controllers. They won't grant anyone to go find solutions. How many diseases have we been chasing forever that we don't have any solutions for? It's like the old saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a change. I will say that it really looks like Alzheimer's, which is now called diabetes type 3, it's being figured out. They're figuring out what's causing it, and it really has to do with your food supply, creating the amyloid plaque in your brain. And they're finding out what the brain likes to run on, the ketones that your brain likes to run on. And, if you want to up your ketone brain functionality, which makes you remember things better, you keep your carbs super low. And I eat almost no carbs. They said you have to keep your carbs under 50 grams. But the average human being eats 300 grams of carbs, which is all your breads, all your pastas. So if you can drive all that down, then your keystones that come out of your fats and sugars starts to surge, and your brain works really, really well. Hence doing shows like this. I hope you can hear that rain because it sounds really awesome. I know some of you live in rainy worlds, but for me it's like heaven to hear this. So I hope you like this episode. I've got quite a few in the queue. I think right now I've got 4 or 5 in the queue. For those of you who know, at this exact moment it's December 3rd. Actually, it's December 4th now, the morning of 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm dropping lots of episodes, so I will tell you that I'll probably get this one out before I put the other one out. I found an episode from 2017, and it's on forgiveness. I don't know if it's any good. I tend to feel like it was pretty good, but I felt like I delayed its release because I thought, it's one of those self-help things people are going to pan. Hopefully it's good. But I also thought I lost the audio file on that particular one. It's because I was using Logic to record my videos on my Mac, which ceremoniously died. And so I found it. So I'm going to be pushing that one out, but I'm going to put a date on the front of that because it's so freaking old. It's 2 years old. Can you believe that? In fact, it's a little over 2 years old now. But I'm going to be pumping stuff out. I'm getting a little bit of a break here in December. One of my projects went on hold. So I'm starting a new film on my own and just doing some other work. So I've got some more time to dedicate to the show. So you should be getting quite a few episodes here. Again, the season is 100 episodes. So at the current click I'm going to be at 50 into this season, 450 here before the end of the year, most likely. So they'll be half the show over within approximately 4 months. So I may end up, if I continue with this pace, I might end up completing the show very early this following year here. So we'll do the same thing we did last time, which is put out episodes during the off season as well. So it won't go dead. But if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. That's where all the videos are. There's 2 video. Get yourself a BitChute account. Please subscribe. Again, we never know what's going to happen with YouTube and the censoring thing. There are all the links for the audio podcast if you like to listen to it in your car. Just get your device that you listen to it on and visit the website, and kapow, you're all set up, which is most like your telephone. There are 3 social media. There's Locked Facebook group, a Twitter page, and the competitor to Facebook called Minds.com. I had quite a bit of traffic when someone recommended it to me. I don't think anyone's seen the page in a really long time, but it's a beautiful site. and it is a free speech zone. I would say that, we've been threatened by Facebook a couple times with posts, and, they put the little bumper in there, and we could take down your whole page. Not sure if if that ever gets taken down, I'm going to create another page for it, and I'm just going to put a post that says getovertominds.com. Hopefully they don't go out of business, but with the lack of traffic I'm seeing, I'm a little freaked out. That might actually happen over there, which would be a shame. There are a couple ways to donate to the page. Patreon is the primary one. PayPal is another way. You can just send a little donation. Your money goes towards paying for $1,000 cameras and hundreds of dollars in software, plus smokes, which is all good for me. My goal would be, in some fantasy world, that this show blows up in such a way that just everyone throwing in a buck, I can do this full time. I think it'd be fantastic, because I would definitely bump up the format quality and obviously the density of the episodes and the amount of research. So put it this way, if you ever learn anything from the shows that's valuable to you, that's the model that will increase that tremendously. But what you get from Patreon is you get the episodes ahead of time. And I've just made sort of a philosophical change recently to make sure that they're up there for a couple days and just editing very quickly. It'll rubber band a little bit. Sometimes I'll be so late on episode. I do always post it on Patreon usually, but some of them might go straight to YouTube when I'm running really late on a deployment. The other thing is that there are no season 1 episodes on this channel. So I have remastered them all, put them on their own channel. So get over there and subscribe just to have it in your queue. There's a little over 100 episodes over there. It's a slightly different show. It's just my format was a little rough. I put the mic right against my mouth, which was unnecessary, but I was still figuring out how to do everything. But I think the subject matter is really good. I mean, I was very proud when I went back and watched it. There's some very important episodes that I refer to a lot, and it's getting views. It doesn't have enough views to monetize, so there's no ads at all on season 1 anymore. The old episodes from this channel that are season 1 do work, but they're unlisted. So if you have them embedded in a web page, they're obviously going to continue to work, and they are embedded all over the web. So they still get hit every single day. Okay, well, other than that, thanks for joining me in this really strange environment in my garage with this really bizarre light that's making me look really weird. But until next time, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.